Good morning. My name is Victor Diaz-Seco. I'm Senior Project Officer at the European Maritime Safety Agency in the Sustainability and Technical Assistance Department. And I'm pleased to have been joined this event and this seminar today to provide you with a presentation about introduction to contingency planning. Let me start with a short introduction on the European Maritime Safety Agency, which is the agency which I belong to. It is a technical body of the European Union, which main objectives are to ensure a high, uniform, and effective level of maritime safety, maritime security, prevention of pollution from ships, and also response to pollution from ships as well as from oil and gas installations. This agency was born in 2002 and was the result of a proposal by the European Commission subsequently to the accidents of the oil tanker Erika and the major oil pollution caused by that accident. So the European Maritime Safety Agency was created and since then provides support to the member states and technical assistance to the European Commission in a broad range of maritime related topics. This presentation about introduction to contingency planning pursues its main objectives to provide you with an overview of the planning process and also to introduce the content and layout of the plans. The reason is that we need to plan, and the plan must be throughout in advance, agreed by all involved, realistic and proven, and up to date. So we need contingency planning, and we need this in place because of in the event of an emergency, there is no time to plan. During crisis management, you have to respond, you have to act. Therefore, it's important that planning is settled and agreed well in advance. The importance of the pre-planning also, it identifies a wide variety of specialized skills, services, and equipment needed, involve the people and places that may be affected, and with lack of planning, the consequences are always counterproductive because it may generate a confusion, lack of direction, and costly mistakes in the event of an incident. We can start with some kind of a case scenario. On 25th July 2020, as you are aware, the Panamanian flag bulk carrier Ocasio was sailing and loading from Singapore to Brazil when it ran aground on a coral reef 1.3 nautical miles off Esni Point in southern Mauritius. The grounding occurred in an ecologically sensitive area near a marine park and wetlands of international importance. It is also a popular tourist destination. Extensive shoreline cleanup operations, and Mauritius was in need of assistance. The contingency plan had never foreseen such an incident in the waters, and international assistance was deployed in order to assist Mauritius in the response to the incident. At the end of the operation, the salvage company announced that some 3,000 tons of oil had been removed from the Ocasio, suggesting that the quantity spilled was somewhere in the region of 600 cubic meters. So do we want to be prepared for such incidents? All pollution emergency plans or contingency plans for spills are required and needed in ports, oil handling facilities, offshore installations, at the state or province level, at national level, and also as part of the international accords. These are essential components of national or regional system to manage oil spill incidents. And how these different levels of authority have to interact with each other. It is widely accepted as a good practice to implement the so-called tier response. Tier response may be incorporated into the development of planning when trying to establish a contingency plan. Tier response systems are based on the concept that the response to spills may be categorized into the following three tiers. Tier 1, which will be preparedness and response capability for small spills, for example, in an individual harbor, that may be mitigated by locally available resources. Tier 2 is preparedness and response capability for spills that require equipment and personnel and resources which go beyond those available locally. And Tier 3 is the response capability required for major spills. This may be linked to the different levels of organization and the different responsibilities that each authority should face while developing a contingency plan, as we saw in the previous slide, at different levels and in line with this tier response. But what are the key elements of a contingency plan? We can distinguish in between three main parts or sections. One, strategy section, which should define the scope and the statutory requirement for the plan and how it will be implemented. It should address what is the division of responsibilities and roles, an overview of the perceived risk, and the response strategy. Then we may have a second part, which could be considered as an action section or implementation of the plan, where we should have procedures for rapid mobilization and control of resources. And in the third part, it could be a data directory, supporting information to enable decisions to be made and subsequent actions to be undertaken. As part of the core of the contingency planning, we have to pay attention to the international and national regulation. Regarding the international regulation, it's worth observing the key international conventions applicable to contingency planning. The main one, from which emanates the contingency planning, is the International Convention on Oil Pollution Preparedness, Response and Cooperation, as well as its protocol for incidents by hazardous and noxious substances of 2000. The International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, as well as the Intervention Convention. There are also key international conventions on liability and compensation, which become at the forefront when planning and implementing actions emanating from shipping accidents or incidents which are directly connected to the contingency planning. These are civil liability conventions, like the Fund Convention, Bankers Convention, Convention on Retention of Liability for Maritime Claims, and the Nairobi Convention on Removal of Wrecks. Therefore, it could be said that the first step in developing a national response system is to ratify applicable international conventions. Coming back to our strategy overview, that main part of the development of the contingency plan, we can distinguish here key elements like the responsibility of the plan, who is the person or the authority responsible for the plan, what are the geographical limits of the plan, what are the links with other contingency plans, national contingency plans, local, regional structures in port with respect to the tier response approach that we saw in previous slides. So how these different levels of responsibility in the response to pollution incidents can match in this tier response system within the context of the different contingency plans. The summary of the risk assessment, marine and shoreline risk. Of course, we have to consider the incident organization, the roles of the management team, response capability, control arrangements, and potential actions like prevention, containment, recovery, dispersal, waste management. When we are trying to set different protection priorities, of course, in contingency planning, we have to consider that the resources are always limited, so we cannot protect everything. Therefore, it is needed to prioritize in advance. But who decides? This should be agreed and approved by all the relevant organizations involved. There are many factors that may affect the priorities. What are the environment, recreational, economic, social risks depend on the relevant jurisdiction. Decisions need to be made and explained fully in the contingency plan. Therefore, we need to use risk assessment as a starting point to identify the risk. So development of the contingency plan should begin with an assessment of the risk of spills in the relevant waters. So we should identify the ships, the cargoes likely to be used in the port, in the offshore facility, in the coastal waters. It would be good to identify the potential hazards and also the dimension of the hazards. So what cargoes are the vessels trading in the area taking on board? What are the bunkering operations that taking place? This could be then matched with assumptions or estimations of potential impact from accidents or incidents. So, for example, in the table on the right, you can see as an estimation of what would be the consequences of a collision on that ship in a wind tank. If the dead weight of the ship is 240,000 tonnage, then the collision in the wind tank can be estimated at 15,000 tons. All of this should be assessed, evaluated, and then when we have identified the risk and we have somehow quantified the risk, we can develop a risk matrix which will give us the context of the likelihood and the consequence of those risks, which is the purpose of risk assessment, to identify the risk and then to estimate what is the likelihood and the consequence of those risks so that we may come up with an assessment of the potential impact of those risks. Once this assessment or evaluation is conducted, then we can estimate what could be the impacts of spills in the environment, in any habitats or species, any use in the port area. We would come up with some aspects regarding health effect on port workers, the need to evacuate, relocate, economic impact on the port and local industry. We can do modeling of these potential spreads of the impact that can be estimated. And with all of this information, the priority habitats or resources that need to be protected can be identified in the form of sensitivity maps. Cost mitigation measures can also be undertaken to address any intolerable risk. But once we have this risk assessment, we identified what are the risks that we face and what are the measures that we can put in place in order to mitigate the risk in our waters. Then we can move to response planning. So we can identify response resources for rapid access to response. In this regard, it's important to identify the process by which locations and inventories of government and industry-owned equipment are accounted for the different tiers. And strategies, response strategies, need to be pre-agreed based on priorities that are two widely recognized and implemented tools like net environmental benefit analysis or spill impact mitigation assessment approach to choose which are the best response options. There could be a broad range of techniques available that can be standalone or used in combination, starting from monitor and wait to use chemical dispersants, containment and recovery equipment, explore the possibilities of in-situ burning, shoreline cleanup. Each strategy has to consider the logistic requirements and the limitations of the techniques. Once we have established the scope, defined the responsibilities, and the different strategies that can be implemented in the response to the risk that we have identified, the contingency plan has the following part that is called action section or action phase. So here is where we should address the roles and the responsibilities of those who may be involved in the response. The first informant, the on-scene coordinator, incident manager. Would be good to have for the different courses of action flow charts or action cards for the roles and responsibilities for the actions of the personnel involved, call-out procedures, notification procedures, and also record keeping. So when the contingency plan is activated, everyone has clear task to perform. This could start with flowcharts on activation, alerting, and assessing from the report from the ship or from the Coast Guard or from the public through a nominated 24 hours on-call person to an initial assessment of the situation. So this is how the contingency plan will be activated and also implemented. So how the management of the incident will take place. Who in the hierarchy will have to be informed? Who in the government? Who are the officials outlined in the plan that will take the responsibility and will take the task to organize the response? Which resources will be used then when we implement a tier level response in the plan? Who directs the response? Who mobilizes the equipment? Which is the equipment to be mobilized? All of this should be reflected in this action phase in the terms of the response guidelines. So when the contingency plan is activated, everything is pre-agreed, clear, and can run smoothly. The last part of the three main blocks of the plan that I presented at the beginning is the data directory. This can be broad, but it should take on board a detailed contact directory, maps and charts, priorities, environmental, commercial, recreational, and social sensitivities, roles and responsibilities, counter-pollution resources, support and auxiliary equipment, occupational health and safety guidelines, sampling methodologies, oil and HNS characteristics, material safety data sheets for common cargoes. I mean, it should be, on the one hand, a directory, but also a repository of all the information that could be relevant when implementing the contingency plan, and could even include pre-prepared press handouts and initial message pro forma to deal with the press on a smooth and professional manner. Once the plan is finalized, approved, agreed, of course, it should be considered as a live document, and there is a need for a constant review and update of the plan. On that, the exercises play a key role, because through exercises, you will get a lot of help to validate the plan, allow people to practice, learn their roles, and develop relationships, familiarize with equipment, test equipment, and is also the tool to have lessons learned and incorporate into the plan. Because during exercises, you will implement the contingency plan, and it's an excellent opportunity to see what are the strengths and weaknesses of the plan to improve. To finalize the presentation, I would like to ask you, or to ask yourself 10 questions. If you have your contingency plan in development or in place, key questions that maybe should foster some reflections on the suitability or on the robustness of the contingency plan. I will not go through all of them, but I would finalize my presentation with the two first questions. Has there been a realistic assessment of the possible threat and of the resources most at risk? Have the protection priorities been agreed, including available techniques? Thank you very much for your time. I remain available for any questions on my presentation.